And that is all of your strengths, all of the lessons you've learned the hard way from making mistakes, all of your values, what's meaningful for you, all of that pulled together. And then in context of how do I going to use this value within the world? So for entrepreneurs, this is going to be for their dream client. Where's that overlap? If you're in a corporate environment, it's going to be for your company and their mission. Where's the overlap there? And then that overlap is what I call your value sweet spot.
Behind the story. Welcome back to Behind the Story. Today I'm joined by Melitta Campbell, TEDx speaker, award-winning business coach, and the value whisperer. She helps leaders and entrepreneurs communicate their true value with clarity and confidence without being loud or pushy. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or unsure how to own your impact, this conversation is for you. Melitta, welcome.
Thanks, Jelani. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Now, for people meeting you for the first time, what's the behind the story of how you became the value whisperer?
I'll try and keep it short because I've been around a long time, so it's quite a long story by now.
I'm sure we'd love to hear it.
But I grew up really quite shy and introverted, and I always thought I didn't really know I was an introvert. That came much later. I just knew that I was shy. I didn't like speaking up. I didn't like being center of attention. And honestly, that served me well. You know, I became the classic good girl, put my head down, worked hard, got good grades at school. I was a great team player in the office until I had one job interview. I had my dream job, and the company went into receivership, and I'd been out of work for 6 months. And I was starting to think, I'm never going to get a job. Then I had the opportunity to interview for a member of the communication pool within the British government. And I thought, wow, what an incredible opportunity. But it was quite challenging to get this interview. You had to do a strategy at the beginning, you had to give them samples of your work. Then you had a whole day of tests and workshops. And then finally, we had the interview. Going into the interview, I thought I'd performed quite well. I was quite confident. But 10 minutes later, I was thrown out, accused of lying. And I was just stunned. But I haven't been lying. So I tried to explain, but then it was too late and I was just kicked out, basically. And so I cried all the way home, as you do. It really felt like the last chance. I'd literally spent my last £5 on the ticket to get to the interview. But then about 3 days later, once my pity fog had cleared, I realized that they were right. Because what I had done in the interview, I hadn't told them about how I could be of value. I told them, well, we did this and we did that and we did the other. So they hadn't seen that I was someone of value. They had just seen, well, assumed that I was someone that stole credit from other people, which totally wasn't the case, but I hadn't given myself credit. So in my next interview, I did things very differently. I really stood up for my value. I showed them why I did certain things, why some projects worked, what I learned from the ones that didn't work, and I got the job pretty much on the spot. So it was a sign for me that people do want to hear your value. It's really important to stand for that. And that's what I continued to do in a quiet way. If you understand your value and you can kind of weave that through the way you show up and the way you interact and the way you approach your life and projects, that value is naturally heard by other people. So that's what I call value whispering, is taking your value, understanding the context of that value and weaving it through what you do so you can naturally stand out without having to be loud or braggy. And it was only later on that I really discovered this term of introvert. I thought, that's what I am. But very often, and I don't know if you've ever come across the same thing, people have said, but introverts don't stand on stage. Introverts can't be leaders. Introverts aren't sales leaders. You know, introverts can't do all of these things. And I was like, yeah, we can. Like later on in life, maybe 20 years ago, I started to go on a bit of a mission to prove that introverts can do all of these things. So that's been sort of my hidden message or my hidden mission behind all of my work, was to be an example for other people that even if you are shy, even if you are introverted, if you have a message and if you care about something, you can do anything. So that's really how I got to where I am and sort of behind the story of the brand.
It's brilliant what you just said, and it resonates with me, and that's one of the things in preparing to have this conversation with you that stood out. You talking about how your work helps introverts because I am an introvert, but I'm not a shy introvert. I've discovered there are different introverts. So there are introverts that are shy, and they're the ones that are not shy. And how it was explained to me is I'm the person that I'm quiet, but if you chat with me, I will. And I have no problem chatting with you because I'm not shy. I'm just a person in a social gathering, for example, that's listening. I'm not the subject of conversation because I don't want to be. I don't want to be in a spotlight, but I'm right there. I'm an observer. I'm listening. That's how my introvertedness, if that's a word, manifests itself. So I completely get what you mean that introverts can do all the things that you said because we can. I mean, I have as well. Another thing that stood out is when you talked about value. In my career as a talent acquisition person, when I'm interviewing a candidate, for example, and I ask them, tell me about a time when XX, and it's we. And then I'll follow up and say, I understand what the team did, but what was your contribution? What did you do as part of the team? Because if you don't get that, then they don't really know what your part in it was. It just sounds like you said it's taking credit. But to us, it sounds like you didn't. What did you do? Did everybody do it? Like, what's your skill level? And that leads me to my follow up question in regards to value. What did it mean to you early on, like back then in that interview where they called you a liar? How did that proposition of value change for you over time?
Ooh, great question. I think, you know, when it comes to finding your value, it changes because it depends on the context. So my value in being who I am today, and my value in this conversation is one thing. My value in the conversation I'll have in an hour's time with my children is going to be different. So every situation you have, every interaction, the value you can bring to that is going to be different. So it's really important to really appreciate your value and where that intersects with what's needed with the current audience. So, like in a job interview, then you need to be a little bit bolder than you would in an average conversation because you really need them to understand that value in your contribution, which, as you said, you very often we say we, and often it isn't the team, it is us. It's just we've learned that language that's inclusive. And I think it's particularly for women, as children when we're playing, if one girl is doing particularly well at a game, we'll change the game. So it's fair for everybody. So using this we language feels like it's being fair and inclusive. And it can work in some situations, but often it just eclipses your value. So there are situations where we really do need to be bolder and brag, but be clear. And I think that's quite a distinction. But it's not always easy to see our value because all too often, in one way or another, we've been told that if we talk about our strengths and what our successes and our achievements, that's bragging, that's bad. No one wants to hear it. On the other hand, we're told, don't tell people about your weaknesses or your failures. That's bad too. But then if you can't talk about these things, then you end up in the middle and the same as everyone else. And I think we get stuck here. And this is why very often we miss what our value is. So we have to really take a step back and see everything and really allow ourselves to be bold. And no one else needs to see this, but in really appreciating what we're doing. And you mentioned it there, like, what did I contribute to this? Or if something went well, what did I contribute to that? And not just have some sort of recognition and gratitude, but real appreciation. I have this skill which enables me to bring this value into the workplace or to my clients or to my family or whatever the situation may be. And I think the more we can build this appreciation of our skills, our talents, the way we see the world, everything becomes value. And then we can amplify that. But if it remains hidden, there's not much we can do. So my value has really evolved massively over the years, and becoming an entrepreneur, starting my own business 18 years ago, it really gets tested because you have just free reign to do anything, but then you have to really focus in on where can I make the most value, what's most meaningful for me. And in my first business, I didn't do that. I just followed, okay, I can do this very well. People are willing to pay me for it. Therefore, I have a business. But 8 years in, I was burning out because it didn't feel purposeful. It didn't feel like I was making a meaningful contribution. And that was really important to me. And there was no growth either because I was doing work that felt very easy. I said it paid very well, but I wasn't growing and developing as a person either. So sometimes we need to think, what is meaningful for us? What do I need to feel fulfilled and to keep growing and to keep expanding that value? And if you do that, then yeah, everything is really exciting. Everything's an opportunity.
In that first 8 years of your entrepreneurial journey, when you were going through those growing pains, what was the moment when it hit you and you finally realized, I'm great at what I do? No modesty required.
I think it came in waves and it didn't always feel like I was good at what I did. And I think we underestimate our real talent. So I already had a reputation and I worked in private banking and I was head of communication. I'd built a network around that. I was like one of the founding members of the Geneva Communicators Network, and everyone in communication in this region, which is quite small to be fair, but we have a lot of large corporates based here in this region. We had access to about 2,000 communicators, and they all knew my name as someone that organized all these events that they went to and the conversations that they had. So when I started my own business, becoming a communication consultant and a leadership communication coach was pretty easy because I just went to my network and said, I'm doing this now. Does anyone need support? And that was the one thing I did that got me clients consistently for 8 years because I had that pre existing reputation. So, the first lesson there was build a network. It really helps. You don't know when you're going to need that in the future, but having that really helped and it still helps me now. And then but at the time, you always start a business and can I really do this? Will people really pay me? So when I had the conversation and I started working for my first client, who I got my first day, it became very clear that they appreciated the quality of the work that I did because then I got more work. They recommended me to other people. They talked to me about me to their colleagues, and I just had that ongoing stream of work. So as someone who's a consultant, sort of basically self employed, if clients talk about you and bring you more clients, that's really the best recognition you can have. Very often I would say, oh no, I have to like write an article or a speech for I worked on behalf of some of the most influential men in the world. It was quite surreal. Can I really do this? And then you saw the last piece of content that they were had their name to, and you say, oh no, I can definitely do better than that because most communication is actually pretty bad. But then very few people, even communication professionals, are trained in communication, which I'm fortunate to have that background. So I could do a really good job. But then I realized that, helping these leaders present messages I didn't necessarily always believe in fully, at least, it wasn't really making a difference in the world the way I wanted to. So then I started to look for how else can I use these skills to make a bigger contribution. And that's when I started working with female founders who were brilliant at what they did, but just couldn't grow their business and find the right clients and opportunities because they couldn't communicate their value of what they did. So that then became the focus of my work.
Let's switch gears for a bit and talk about one of the concepts I read over and skimming your work, the concept of being good isn't always visible, right? A lot of talented people assume that their work will speak for itself. Why doesn't that work in real life?
Yeah, it would be nice, wouldn't it? If everyone just instantly saw our value and we didn't have to sell ourselves. Several reasons. So one that what we understand as value. For example, I work in communications and very often people have no clue of the amount of work and effort and skill that goes behind producing a memo, for example. They just think, oh, you just sit down and write it, or an article. It doesn't work like that. You have to research it, you have to write it, you have to edit it, you have to tweak it, test it, and so on. Plus, you have to understand the psychology of the audience, and there's so much to understand that other people just don't know. So they're not going to see that value if you don't educate them in that value. And often they'll like, I'll give you an example. I worked in internal communications in the private banking sector, and I'd work with some of the other departments because, well, they were my clients. And what I made a mission or made a point of doing is after I'd worked on them on a particular project, maybe it was an event we ran for them, or maybe even just an article on the intranet, was I would go and speak to them afterwards and say, how did that work for you? And that was the point when they could stop and think, well, yeah, it really worked. This happened as a result. Then, without being bragging or being pushy in any way or arrogant, they're starting to associate me with someone that creates value for them, but in their own words, because they've reflected on that. So that's how I quietly built a strong reputation within the bank. Private banking here in Switzerland, it's still very male driven. And so, as a woman who at the time I was just in my early 30s, and I can't even read numbers, I'm dyscalculic. So I was really the least qualified person almost, but I built my position to report direct to the CEO for that reason. So if we can find those ways to quietly help people understand our value and appreciate how it's helping them on their terms, then that builds our position, our credibility, and you just never know where that's going to take you. So I think it's not that they don't necessarily see our value, but they don't know what that looks like. Or more, also the case, they're busy and stressed and focused on other things. So they're not thinking about you at all. So by taking that just a little moment of time to stop and help people understand and appreciate what we do, then that can make a difference. The other thing I did there was, as I said, people aren't trained in communication, and a lot of communication I had was awful. And so we would edit it and improve it, and then people got really, really upset and offended. So what I did was I put out a 2-hour training that anyone that wanted to publish any kind of content within the bank had to go on this 2-hour training. It was very high level, but it just helped them understand what effective communication looked like. And it didn't improve anything. They still sent us terrible work. But when we went back and said, this is how we can strengthen it, then they said, thank you. you know, so they finally they appreciated the work that we did and the value of that for them. So that helped change our perspective as well and made our work much easier because we could improve the quality and work with people rather than what they felt was us working against them previously. So there are small, subtle ways we can help people really appreciate that value.
Speaking of value and going back to what you mentioned about working with a lot of women founders and CEOs and whatnot, and including yourself in that category, what are some of the common ways that high performing women may unintentionally minimize their value without even realizing it?
I'm sure you could answer this question really well. I think we have, as I say, we have this, we've grown up with this idea that we have to be fair and we don't want to stand out and be better than anyone else. And that's really a female position. Little boys, when they're playing in the play schoolyard, if one boy is really good at something, the other boys were like, "You're amazing at this," and that he'll be like championed for that. With girls, it's different. So it starts really early on, and it's part of our biology. So there's that we're working against, but also, there's still the way girls and boys are raised is different. Girls are raised to be risk averse, to be careful, to be quiet, and that is changing a little bit, but still that there's a lot of these ideas get into our mind. And so when I'm working with female founders, two things happen. One, all of these kind of ideas come up that, well, do I have permission for this? Do I deserve this? Am I allowed to do this? Other people are so much better than me. Do I have a place? And men have these questions as well, but I think it seems to hold women back more. When you start something new, like you become a female founder, that changes your identity. And it's when we have changes and challenges to our identity that imposter syndrome comes in. So what I've noticed as is a difference between female founders and male founders is most female founders didn't, or certainly of my generation, I think it's changing with the younger generation, but they never intended to start a business. But the business came from something that really wasn't working, or that, like myself, I couldn't return to a corporate office once I had children. I lived abroad and I just didn't have the support network and the childcare. So I had no choice. So, and I think a lot of women find themselves in that space. So they're starting a business without a network, without any sort of plan in place, and they're starting from zero. So there's a big shift in their identity. When most of the men I speak to start a business, it's always been part of their plan. And so, yes, they're shifting their identity, but they've already done a lot of the mindset work to build up to that readiness to step into that new identity. Plus, they have a network of other men who have done this before and they have that path and they can see it's possible. Whereas women don't have that same network and those same role models for them to see, oh, this is possible and this is what it takes, and have people to turn to for support and feedback along the way. So I think that that's one thing I've noticed that I think I don't have anything scientific to back that up, but it's just what I've observed over the last 20 years of running my business that seems to be pretty consistent.
Okay. Let's talk about value whispering. In simple terms, what is it?
Part of what I explained already, it's really understanding and appreciating your true value. And that is all of your strengths, all of the lessons you've learned the hard way from making mistakes, all of your values, what's meaningful for you, all of that pulled together. And then in context of how do I going to use this value within the world? So for entrepreneurs, this is going to be for their dream client. Where's that overlap? If you're in a corporate environment, it's going to be for your company and their mission. Where's the overlap there? And then that overlap is what I call your value sweet spot. And value whispering is taking that value sweet spot. So, what makes you differentiated and valuable in that particular situation, and weave that through everything you do. So, my degree was in design management, which is all about communication, but not necessarily communication through words. It can be through the way a building feels, or the signage, or the placing, or the design, everything together. So communication too often is just people thinking it's the words, but it's every way that people experience you. And if everything is based, all your decision, your thinking, your actions are based on that value sweet spot, then you're naturally going to stand out as a natural choice for your dream clients or situation because it's all coherent around what makes you different and what makes you valuable in that situation. There is a third stream to this because you can have the perfect message, the perfect business plan, the perfect marketing plan, and it won't work if you don't believe in it. If you don't believe in yourself, if you don't have the time and energy to live into and show up the way that you want to, it's going to be aligned to this value sweet spot. So you need to put the right boundaries in place and really work on your mindset and belief as well alongside that.
I've got a quote from the book. I want to read it and then I want you to comment on it as far as how someone like me should interpret this. It says, value whispering is the art of intentionally weaving your true value through everything you do so that you stand out as the obvious choice for your dream clients. It ensures that no matter how soft your voice, you can resonate deeply with the right people and create a powerful impact. Say more.
Well, I think that that aligns with what I've just said, but when people are experiencing you in the right way, that if I've created my value sweet spot is all about how can I help people communicate their value in a way that helps them attract the people and results and opportunities that they really want. So everything I do is around that. And that has to be central to the way I show up, the language I use, the places you'll find me in, the content I put on social media, my brand and how that comes across. Everything you see in my background is intentional to echo all of this. So what used to find is like people will come up to me in the street and say, "Oh, are you that LinkedIn lady?" It's like, "What do you mean LinkedIn lady?" And I'm not terribly consistent on social media, I have to say. But I think because all of my messages are coming from the same place, they all contribute and stack up together. They are memorable because I'll read a message and it amplifies what they already know or believe. And if they meet me networking, I'm the same person with the same message and the same feeling as when they read my book or they listened to my podcast, or so whichever way they experience me, it's the same. And I don't have to work at that because I'm coming from my value sweet spot. I don't have to be anything or perform in any way. My voice is naturally being heard consistently. And so that then becomes very loud in the marketplace and stands out. And so it takes a bit of courage because it is you being you. But at the same time, I think it does help you sidestep a lot of this comparisonitis that we can have very easily, particularly with social media. You know, we're just bombarded with pictures and success stories of other people just like us doing different things in a different way. But once we have that value sweet spot and we're like, good for you, you're doing this and it's succeeding, but I'm doing this way because this is what's meaningful for me, and builds those right relationships with my dream client or with my colleagues in a way that's important for me. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And here's a follow-up to that about value again. What's a fast way that I or anybody can identify their value when we're so close to our work and we can't see it clearly?
That's a great question. Well, there's two things. One, there is a fast way, but there's also it's going to evolve and it's going to be different in every situation. So it's not something that you'll understand and that's it fixed forever. You need to take intentionally stay in tune with it and where it can take you next and how you can use it to have a different impact. But the quick way, there's two quick ways, and it's really to ask other people because they already know what your value is and they can reflect that back to you quite quickly. So firstly, go back to all the feedback you've ever had from your colleagues, your bosses, your clients. You look at those testimonials, the feedback you've had. Anytime someone said thank you, why did they say thank you? What is in those words that they said? And you'll find a lot of clues there already that you might not have missed.
Mm.
And the other thing is along the same track, but to intentionally go out to a minimum of 5 people that you trust. You can certainly do more because then you'll see the patterns and just ask them, what have you noticed that I do really well, perhaps better than other people that I might have missed myself? And see what comes back. And it's quite extraordinary what people come back to with. And I know when I did this for my network, I thought they're all going to come back and say communication because that's pretty much all I've done most of my career. And all my volunteer work, it's around Toastmasters, it's around the Geneva Communicators, it's around TEDx, it's all around communication. But what they came back with was connection and value. And I thought, that's really interesting because that's how I see communication. I don't see it as words. I see it as a way to connect people and ideas and make things happen. So it was really interesting that they had seen that really clearly. And that came back from 90% of the people that I reached out to. And I'd missed that completely. But when I saw it, I was like, yes, that's it. So that's the quick way. But then we have to appreciate that and start to believe in it and look for the evidence that's going to keep confirming that to us because we will receive this evidence and so often we're like, yeah, but they're just being nice. We'll discount it. As you say, we tend to diminish our skills and our strengths sometimes, but we need to be strong and not do that and do the opposite and instead say, great, this is really interesting. This feels right. Where else is the evidence that supports this? And keep looking for that evidence. And as you said earlier, how did I make this happen? Is that linked to my value? And just keep topping that up so you get this rock solid belief in it.
I really appreciate your answer because of all the details, because you detailed something I've been doing throughout my life with every relationship, whether it's work or personal. I ask for the continue, start, stop feedback. I ask people, hey, what's something I should continue doing that you see me doing? What's something I should start doing that I'm not doing? And what should I absolutely stop doing that you observe me doing? And I use it even with my son and friends and work. And you just explained in detail a higher level of that concept. So that's really brilliant. What's the three-step framework? What is that about? Tell me about that.
So it's the first step is understanding your true value because you can't communicate your value if you don't first appreciate what that is. So this is the idea of really taking time to see everything, all of our hidden ones, doing the exercise we just talked about to get that external perspective as well, and really start to sit with that and appreciate that value and how it shows up and how it enables us to make a meaningful contribution in the world. And then the second part then is to weave that through everything we do. So to use that as the basis of every decision we make going forward. And again, this can take time because you really need to think, okay, well, if that's my value, if that's how I want to be seen in the world, if this is the difference I want to make, what does that look like? What does it look like? What does it feel like in this situation? And sometimes you can, in fact, I did an exercise with a workshop I did a few years ago, and we did this exercise with the people in the room and got them to then reduce that down to 3 words. Okay, so if this is your value, what 3 words would remind you that that's how you want to show up in your next interaction? And then they forgot about that exercise. But then in the afternoon, we got them to walk in a circle. I just did it. It wasn't we, it was me. I got them to walk in a circle, um, and they were just walking and just like looking down and a bit confused and like, why am I walking in a circle? And then I got them to stop, to close their eyes and remember those 3 words, and then continue walking in the circle. And the difference was instant. They stood up properly. They started looking at people in the eye. They were smiling. They were really completely different people just because they reminded themselves how they want to show up. What is that value they want to bring out into the world? So once you stop and think, what does that mean for me on a daily basis? And in the book, I share the daily achievement planner. And right at the top of that, I get people to put those 3 words so that they're reminding themselves every day, this is how I want to be in my interactions today. So that's the simple way of weaving that value, but you can also do it more intentionally as well. And then the third part is the self leadership, working on your mindset, your habits, your boundaries, making sure that you have that time and energy. And that's something that's particularly important for us introverts, is the energy management. We can do everything that an extrovert can do, but we do have to be mindful that we have enough time to recuperate, that we're not pushing ourselves beyond our social battery, because that's when things don't go according to plan and we don't feel good and we're not contributing in a way that we feel proud of. Having that self leadership to support everything else is really key as well.
You hit on something that I thought it was just me, um, in regards to energy and managing the social battery. Because in my job, if I'm interviewing candidates and I have days sometimes where I'm back to back to back, at the end of those days from talking so much, I am wiped out. I'm so drained, and I'm thinking, "Oh, something's wrong with me. I need to be more healthy." But you're saying as an introvert, doing that has a direct impact on our energy levels. I never knew that.
Yeah, absolutely. There is definitely, it's our how we put ourselves out there, that social interaction. We can 100% do that, but it's very draining for us. It's less draining with people we know than people we don't know. So if you're interviewing new people the whole time, that's going to be much more draining than if you're having conversations with your colleagues every day. So it's different situations. And I'm actually tempted to do some research, because when I speak to people who are introverts, they're like, yes, I'm introverted, but, or extroverts, I'm extroverted, but, you know, in certain situations, I feel more shy, I feel more introverted, and the introverts in certain situations, they feel more extrovert. So I kind of feel we're all situation verts. So it's important to understand, what are those situations that are important for me to show up in this way? Is that something that I'm naturally inclined to do? Is this something that I need to prepare for, build my skills for, save energy for, and just be a bit more mindful of the situations in our days and our weeks, and make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success in each of those. And so I think, definitely with energy and that social battery, and anything that's novel is very draining for us. We just need to have a little bit of downtime in between, can make all the difference. So I like to do the Pomodoro technique, where you have 25 minutes of focus and 5 minutes off. Found for me that wasn't quite enough. I needed more time to get in the flow and more time off. So I do 50-10. So 50 minutes of focus, 10 minutes of walking outside, doing stretches, And by the end of the day, I have so much energy. And so it's a small shift, but just ending that next meeting a little bit sooner so you give yourself a bit more time to recuperate in between can make a huge difference.
45-15 works for me, and I'll do 5 minutes of movement and then 10 minutes of reading to get back into the flow of what I'm doing. So yeah, I think like you said, it's probably something that's different for everybody, 50-10, 45-15. But yeah. What does it mean to resonate with the right people? Is there a way to do that intentionally without coming off as though you're chasing them or something like that?
I think when you resonate with the right people, you don't need to chase them, you'll attract them, and you will be naturally putting off the people that just aren't right for you. And it's just being on the same page, really. If you want to attract your dream clients, if you have intentionally created everything with them in mind to show them that you understand them, that you see their position, that you have a methodology that's just right for them. If everything is echoing that, then it's going to resonate with those right people. So a lot of the work I do, it's not loud and brash and out there. It's not fast. I mean, it ends up being faster because everything is in alignment, so it's smooth. But there are certain people that just say, "Just tell me what to do, and I'm gonna go and do it." And that's not the way I work, and it's not the way my clients want to be supported either. So, in being really true to my value and how I believe I get the best results for my clients and being really true to that in everything that I put out there, then those right clients are see me and they finally this is what I've been waiting for. So I think it's intentional in that it's all coming from the same place, but it's not forced. And I think that's the difference there. If anything feels forced, if it feels like you're trying to be or do something that doesn't feel natural, that's something to tune into and think, hold on a minute. If it's not feeling in tune with me and in alignment, then it's not going to resonate with my dream clients either.
If someone is introverted or naturally quiet, what are some ways you would recommend that they can build influence without changing their personality?
Whatever way they want to. It's not like, okay, oh, you're quiet, therefore you must write. Know so many very successful public speakers who are very quiet and very introverted. And I think if we surveyed them, you'd probably find more public speakers are introverted than extroverted because we think we're deep thinkers. And so we have a deep message that's well connected, well framed, well structured. And when we're prepared and ready, we can feel really confident on stage. So I think if you're quieter, there's no right or wrong way to do anything, but I would just do what feels right for you and play around and experiment because I'm a public speaker now. As you mentioned in the introduction, I've given a TEDx talk. If you asked me 10, 15 years ago to do that, I would have just like run in the opposite direction and hid. I just never thought that that was something that would feel right for me, but I've built those skills over time. I've built my confidence, I've built my message, I've built those skills. And now I love speaking on stages, give me the opportunity and I'm there. So, and that's one thing that I've got from my podcast as well is that because I'm there speaking every week, well, I've just reduced it to every other week, but that has helped me maintain that comfort zone to keep that comfort zone expanded. So I think if we find something that feels like it's right for us, confidence is dynamic. It's not always there if we don't work at it. So look at how can you maintain those skills. Join a Toastmasters group or something where you can practice and keep strengthening that skill over time. But I don't think there's anything a quiet person can do that a loud person can't, and vice versa. It's just important to do it in a way that feels comfortable and meaningful for you.
Let's talk about something that is really a difficult conversation for a lot of people when they're working at a company, and that's money. How
Mhm.
does value whispering show up in a salary conversation?
Right. Well, this isn't my expertise. I know there are amazing people out there who are great at helping people with negotiations, but I can share how I did it in a corporate environment. And I really aligned with my role. And I went to my boss and said, this is my role as I understand it. Yes, he agreed with that. Wonderful. This is how I would love to approach my role and where I think I bring the most value. He agreed. Wonderful. This is what I'm actually doing day to day. So either that's okay and you're missing out on all of this value, or I need a team. And I think it was a 10-minute conversation and I walked away with 3 team members. So that got me a team. And then within the team, I was like, well, now I have more responsibility, then I need a pay rise. And I think this would be fair. Does that sound okay for you? And he said, yes. It was really pretty easy.
Yeah,
But I think if everything is coming from, this is what I'm doing that I believe is valuable and aligned with what you're asking of me, is that right? And they're saying yes. Then you say, great, well, I'm not able to do that unless I have these conditions. Or if that's the value, then I believe this is the price. So I was able to demonstrate how my value has grown over there. At the point it was, I think I've been in the company 18 months, and say, well, this is what I was coming to do, which I've done. And now I've taken it here, that's more valuable for the company. I believe it's contributing this. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I wasn't wrong, so they had to pay.
that's brilliant. And here's a follow-up to that. I mean, because you mentioned earlier about working with women, and obviously you are. How do you see women in those types of situations, whether they're working for a company or their own company? How often do you see them undercharging and over-delivering? And like, how
All the time.
is there a way that they can set a boundary to avoid that? Like, how would you advise somebody that you see doing that, for example?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I get my clients to do in a business context is to use a pricing structure called good, better, best. So you have your good offer, which is priced at the point where most people would say yes. So that they feel comfortable that they have this offer at a price that's a comfortable yes or a small stretch, but it's a reduced service because that's what you can deliver for that price. Then you have your better offer, which is exactly what you want to be delivering, how you believe you get the best results, and that's priced the way you want it to be priced. Now, what you want is for the good and the better to not be that different. So it's easy for people to think, okay, well, yeah, that's good, but I need the better solution. And so I'm willing to pay that. So they can really see, okay, yes, you can have this lower price, but you get this is what the value you get for that price. So they can start to see the 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 scope of what they how they want their offer, their problem solved, and what that involves. Then you have your best offer, which is a great strategy for women who are undercharging, and that middle bracket, the better offer is perhaps priced just a little bit above where they feel comfortable, but they can see that that's correct. Then you have the stretch offer for them, is a lot more and it has a lot more value. And that enables them to comfortably put their price up because they're not asking people for that price, but it's there if people want this additional amount of value. And it's been really interesting how many people have done that strategy. And the next week they've had calls with potential clients and they've all gone for the best strategy and the best pricing, which then told that person, you can charge that amount. People are willing to invest when they see the value. And so it's quite a safe way for any entrepreneur, not just women, to really have a price point that they think, okay, people are willing to pay this. This is the price we want to charge. And this is the price my business coach is telling me I should be charging, but I'm a bit scared to. And then you can position it and then you can let your clients tell you what your value is. So I quite like that approach, particularly when someone's a bit unsure of their pricing. It gives them a bit of security as well because they're not pushing the client is choosing. So it gives them more scope.
That's brilliant psychologically because I've seen it not in good, better, best, but I've seen it in products I've purchased where it says, this is the beginner or starter. That's a starter and intermediate and then pro. And pro is really everything you want. And it's so hard psychologically to go back to the starter version because you're looking at the pro version thinking, that's everything I need. I can't do the starter version. So it's actually a brilliant way psychologically to get the price that that you want by making the person think as though they're the ones actually selecting it and you're agnostic to what they select. But you really want them to select the pro version, the best. But that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I've got one last question for you, something that I think would benefit the audience. If you could give the audience a 7-day challenge to step into their value, what would that look
Mm. I think let's take them back to that exercise where they spend a bit of time thinking through what is that value and reduce that to 3 words. And then every day, write, like, put those 3 words somewhere visible. Maybe it's at the top of your diary or on your computer, and then challenge yourself before you do anything, before you write a LinkedIn post, before you show up for a podcast, before you go and interact with your children, remind yourself of those 3 words and think, what will it look like in this next interaction if I'm living into these 3 words? So, bit by bit, you can start to make that value just a natural part of how you show up.
brilliant? Well, Melita, what have you got coming up? Anything you want to share with the audience? Any speeches coming up, books release, any products you want to share?
So many things.
Take it away.
Well, I have just released my book, Value Whispering. It's a smarter way to market your small business, which just happens to be brilliant for introverts. It's really the book of everything we've discussed today. It's out now on Amazon. If I know some people don't like Amazon, you can go to Candy Jar Books. That's my publisher and buy it directly from them. Or if you go to melittacampbell.com, that's Melita with 2 T's, /chapter, you can get the first chapter of that book for free. And that first chapter, I've deliberately written it so that you get an overview of the entire process, plus some mindset support to help you really shift the way you start to think about and deliver your true value.
Well, we'll leave it there. Melita, thank you so much for being on Behind the Story and best of luck with the book.
Thanks, Jelani.
Behind the story. Behind the story.